Welcome to the Recovery Stories podcast, bringing you stories of hope, healing, and triumph over the bondage of addictions, mental health struggles, trauma, and dysfunctional family systems. Our courageous storytellers have chosen to live their journey out loud in order to show others that they don't have to suffer in silence. The stories you will hear are raw, real, and may involve graphic and triggering content. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or are ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name is Patrick Custer and I'm your host. I'm so excited to kick things off today as it is NEDA Week, which, if you don't know, stands for National Eating Disorders Awareness Week. And we're so lucky to have Amy Brown on the show today from the Bobby Bones Show and from so many other walks of life that she is doing so much to be a world changer and a conduit to help manifest positive change in the lives of other people. Welcome, Amy, to the show.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I'm thankful for other people that have put things out there for me. So anytime, especially if I get to partner up with someone else that's doing the same thing, it's pretty cool to just come alongside people so that they know they're not alone, especially during a week where there is so much attention put on it. I feel as though you and I are talking with people year round that are in this process and making it happen. But obviously the week of the year where there's a lot of highlight on eating disorder awareness, it's definitely good to take advantage of spreading the word and people knowing that resources like this are even out there.
Absolutely. And talking about resources, so we're all about spreading hope and sharing experiences and solution. But I want to just mention a disclaimer that neither of us are therapists, but there's access to a plethora of hope and help out there. If you're struggling, if someone you know is struggling, we're going to have resources in the show notes for this episode, but you can also go to a wonderful resource, nationaleatingdisorders.org, which is the NEDA's website, and get educated further, find access, all the things that you can think of. I would encourage anybody to go there, especially for the educational piece. It's really great, and they stay up to date. One of the things I wanted to kick off was talking, because the umbrella here, that we sit underneath is mental health, right? And they just released the statistics for, there's always like a pretty big delay in the statistics of the studies that they release. So they just released 2021 statistics of people struggling with mental health, which was it equated to 1/4 in the United States of adults qualified as diagnosable for one or more mental health disorders. But that number jumps to 1/3 of people who are 18 to 25. And so we see so much. I don't think anybody's probably very surprised at that with the advent of social media and the pressures of that age range, and so it's that, but both of those numbers are both staggering and not surprising, as you and I both talk about this a lot regularly. But for anybody who may not, that may make you feel less alone, like you were just talking about. And that's our goal, is like to share a story, get connected, and provide access, say you're not alone. And so with that, I want to lead into your story, and just for anybody who, for instance, if they haven't heard of or followed Bobby, but with a huge radio show, by the way, but like if nobody has, if this is the first time they're hearing about you, could you share a little bit about what you do today? And then we'll lead into kind of like your life from the beginning.
Well, Patrick, you're sweet, but I would say majority of America is not listening to the Bobby Bone Show. I would say Bobby likes to say we're well known in rural parts of America, but I've been in radio for 17 years. And so some of that was spent in the pop world. And then we moved country about 10 years ago. And that's what brought us to Nashville. And then from that, the show grew. And we've been plugging along with that. And then podcasting became a thing. And I partnered with iHeart for my podcast, Four Things with Amy Brown. And then 3 years ago, just about 3 years ago, we launched Outweigh, which was just supposed to be a 4-part series on my Four Things podcast. And it was so well received that we decided to make it its own podcast. And I launched it with a registered dietitian, Lisa Haim, out of New York, who was a crucial part in my recovery. She has a whole program called Fork the Noise, which, you know,
I love that name, by the way.
we often have a lot of noise in our head that, you know, takes up space and oftentimes rent free, as they say. And it can just be so overwhelming and detrimental to your life because you spend so much time up in your head with the noise that you're missing out on truly living. And so I was very thankful for her program and her partnership in launching the podcast. And she became a mom during the process and has her own podcast called Truthiest Life. So she had to step away from that. So I love on Outweigh now I have rotating experts or guests that come in and join me that are in similar field because, you know, I love your disclaimer at the beginning that we're not therapists and I'm not an expert. I never want to claim to be. I just am someone that has been through my own journey and my own therapy sessions, lots of them. And I have certain tools and resources and I get to share my experience, which dates back to 13, maybe. I can't remember the exact age I was, but my eating disorder started because I was exposed to dieting at a young age and my brain wasn't fully developed. As many know, it doesn't develop till 25 or so. And another key part of my recovery was a book called Brain Over Binge. And that unlocked so much for me when it came to my brain and my childhood brain and what was happening because I had done years of therapy, but some stuff just wasn't resonating with me. And while I think talk therapy is absolutely amazing and necessary, I just feel like sometimes therapists were like, especially when I was a kid, not now that I'm an adult and I know how to actually process what I'm thinking and have real conversations with my therapist. But when you're a kid trying to figure it out and you just have this person looking at you that maybe because your parents don't know any better, mine didn't, they were like, oh, we just need to get her in therapy. And so I went and they weren't an expert in eating disorders. So they didn't know. And this was the 90s. And so
Can I pause you right there? Because this is something that I think is important for everybody to know while we're talking about being such huge advocates for therapy. Therapists, thank you. You are so important to all of our lives. But in seeking a therapist, most people end up on Psychology Today. And unfortunately, there are a lot of therapists that click boxes. I see this all the time. People ask me constantly. They're like, well, this person says they specialize in eating disorders. It is so important that when you are seeking a therapist related to this subject or any subject, if you're needing specialized therapy, that you have a conversation with that therapist and ask them what percentage of their clientele that they are seeing that comes from, struggling with the same issues. Because unfortunately, for whatever reason, a lot of people get mismarketed out there today. And so that's not just, 10, 15-year-old information or whatever time period you're talking about. Like we get people that right now that get connected with a therapist that just may not know, enough or the right thing and wants to help and has the best of intentions. And so that's one thing that I just really, I always love throwing in there because it's an important piece to finding the right path. So I'm sorry for interrupting you, but just wanted to throw that in there.
No, it's an excellent point. And that's why I don't know if I made it a point, but I should have. I talked about her program, Fork the Noise, but Lisa is a registered dietitian that specializes in eating disorder recovery. So same thing goes if you're looking for a registered dietitian. some are, because of their training in school, might give you information or tools or resources that are going to be very triggering and actually they won't end up being beneficial to your recovery. They could send you deeper into the hole. And Lisa experienced that. She sort of realized as she was doing more damage to her clients than good once she got into recovery herself and realized all the red flags. And so, yes, therapist, whatever the case may be, it's great to, like, currently my therapist is someone that specializes, in addiction and addiction recovery. I have recently dealt with that in my family in the last couple of years with substance abuse. And I didn't know anything about that. I knew about eating disorder, but I didn't know, some of it can be considered the same. Like, we're all just trying to numb out, right? We're all just trying to self-medicate and navigate through this crazy world as best as we can. And I'm thankful my therapist specializes in that, because it's very helpful for me when I'm trying to understand codependency and the role that that's something that definitely shows up when you are living with someone that is an addict or has an eating disorder or any other thing. So it's very, very important. So I'm glad you touched on that. But back to the 90s. So it was more like 30 years ago. I was, a therapist would tell me, like, okay, your dad left when you were 9. So clearly that's the issue. You're trying to fill a void with food and you're overeating, and that's the problem. And while, yes, my dad did leave when I was 9 and I likely was trying to fill a void, I really think that the issues with food for me showed up when we had someone move into our home for a little bit, because, my dad had moved out, my mom had this house, and she had some family friends that needed a place to live while they were waiting for their house to get built. And it was going to be done in like 3 months. So they didn't want to go rent somewhere. Right. Yeah. So they moved in with us, and I love this family so much, but the mom was a big dieter, and she brought all this diet food into our home that I otherwise hadn't really been exposed to. But again, it was inevitable. I would have been exposed to it because it was the 90s. Right. Fat-free was everything. Snackwells, spray butter, all the
spray butter,
all the things, So, but that began the cycle of, restricting, dieting, and then the restriction led to the binging. And Brain Over Binge was the first book, and I only read that a few years ago. It was in my late 30s. I only consider myself to be in full-blown eating disorder recovery for the last 3 years or so. I think it was March of 2020 that Outweigh launched, but it was like February of 2020 that Lisa finally got me to delete MyFitnessPal. And that was like the last thing I was holding on to. I couldn't, which that's not a bad thing for some people. Like that can be an amazing tool, especially if you really do need to track your protein, your carbs, your fat, you're trying to eat adequately, whatever you may use that for. I'm not demonizing that as a resource for everybody, but for me, it was my final piece that I was like, could not let go of. And I couldn't see it. It's like, you don't know till you know. And Lisa was saying, Amy, like, if you're not able to go to bed at night because you haven't entered everything that you ate, that's you still having control and trying to, hold on to this last bit of your disordered behavior. And so I remember I thought, well, if we're launching Outweigh, like I got to have my ducks in a row. So I got to delete this. And I deleted it. And probably for the first 2 weeks of me not entering it in that February, I was, I would text Lisa and be like, I don't know, like something felt like I was having withdrawals. Like it was pretty wild, the hold that it had on me. But I would say, to back up, that was the final piece to my puzzle. But the Brain Over Binge, which was a book that was introduced to me in my late 30s, was something that finally clicked. It was like, oh, I wasn't eating a bunch of food to fill a void because my dad left. I was eating a bunch of food because my body was hungry and my brain didn't know how to trust me. And so I started the binging, and I was a binge eater that I would go into that trance. Like you just feel like you have no idea what's happening. And then all this time has passed and you look around your kitchen and you've eaten all this food.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to feel sick, and then you take other measures, different types of purging. Sometimes that would be 2 hours at the gym, or sometimes that would be literal purging
Mm-hmm.
to get rid of it. And then it just was this vicious cycle. And then I would restrict again. And then my brain would be like, hello, we need food. So the minute I would give it food, they'd be like, okay, I'm going to sit here and eat all that I can because I can't trust this person. And I have no idea when she's going to feed me again. And
Yeah.
so that is, and I mean, I'm summarizing that book. This is and I'm paraphrasing to my
Sure.
own experience, but Catherine Hansen is the author of that book. And the way she was sharing her own journey and how, she had done a lot of talk therapy and then realized like, oh, I wired my brain to not trust me and to be starving all the time. So that's where the binging is coming from. So
Mm-hmm.
the minute she started to rewire her brain, and every time she went for a binge, it was like, turn around, do the opposite, turn around, do the opposite. And the more she did it, the less her brain was relying on a binge. And then alongside that, she started eating adequately and making sure that her body was fueled, and she allowed no dieting, no restriction, no rules. Obviously, if you have an allergy or a true gluten intolerance, you can
Mm-hmm.
have to omit certain things. But I was someone that omitted gluten and dairy and all the things. And my body literally doesn't have an allergy to any of those things.
So I want to get to rules in a second, because that's a really huge piece to all of this, obviously. But you mentioned something that like I consider, not that I'm like the thought leader on this, but I think a lot of people consider kind of a root chicken or the egg type of thing, right? So we live in a society that is very polarizing, good versus bad, right? And we're given messages, so many messages of black and white thinking, good versus bad, from early on in childhood. So you already outlined for us where you can identify that first period where you realized that skinny is good, and what have you, and this is how I might attain that. But do you remember that dialogue for you as you were acknowledging and moving forward? How old were you at that point, and what led, if you don't mind me asking, and I'll say here, we always do a disclaimer because I like to ask the nitty-gritty questions and say, what were those initial periods like for you? So like when you were exposed to that, right? This world was open to you, but you know, most people don't figure out how to throw up on their own. They're exposed. Somebody
Yeah.
introduces how to. And so I'm just interested to know, like, through your teen, because it was your teen years, right?
Yes, it was my teen years. So it was in high school that it started. And then my eating disorder progressed and took different, it's almost like it was on its own little journey with all the different things that I got to take part in, from the different diets. I've done everyone under the sun, the different workout routines, the binging, the purging, the restricting, the orthorexia, all the way until I was, until deleting my fitness pal so 3 years ago. So
Yeah.
you're talking from probably 1994, 93 was probably when I was exposed to the dieting. And then like 94, 95, when the stuff started happening, where I was like, what in the world? And so you're talking almost 30 years of me living with some type of eating disorder or very disordered behavior. And so back to your question about my thoughts back then, and the first time I ever threw up, I remember, I honestly don't know how I was exposed to it. But I remember the first time it happened, I was so terrified. I was at my dad's house. He had all the best food. And I was at his house, and then I called my mom after, and I said, and I'm thankful I had this type of relationship with her, but I said, I just threw up my food. And she was very supportive. And that's why we started the journey through therapy. But then I wasn't able to get anywhere because we weren't figuring out the root, and it just continued. And so I wouldn't say, I know that there's severe cases of binge purge. I binged more than I purged. So then, I would start to see the weight gain, or my thoughts were comparing myself to all of my friends who just got to eat normal. And I was so jealous of them, and they got to eat when they were hungry and stop when they were full. And I didn't understand that. And, I would be eating dinner at my best friend's house or in the cafeteria at school. And I would have my little apple and Special K cereal that I would mix with fat-free yogurt. And that was my lunch. And then, one of my best friends, I just remember her getting whatever she wanted from the line, the cafeteria, and then always getting ice cream after, like Bluebell ice cream. Grew up in Texas, so we had that at school. And I'm not saying it was the most nutritious option for us, but when you're a kid, that's all I was looking at, is like how, but she would stop when she was full. She wouldn't have to eat everything on there. And then the ice cream, she would eat so slow. And I was so perplexed by it. And she was happy, and she would just like talk, and it wasn't a big deal. And if people wanted a bite of her ice cream, she's like, here, yeah, take it. I don't care. She had no real, she enjoyed food, but she wasn't like obsessed with it as I was becoming. And so my thoughts, to go back to your question again, I don't know how the throwing up thoughts got in my mind, but they were there, and it's like my body just did it. And then, once, for me, I was able to figure it out. So I did. So who knows if it was a TV show or a movie or hearing other people talk about it? I don't know. But I just knew I had to get rid of the food because I was so uncomfortable. It was probably just that I just felt so sick that I was like, oh, okay, if I got rid of it, I'd feel better. But the other thoughts, they were just all consuming, all food, all workout, all the time, which was all through my teen years, all through college, all through my 20s. Through my 30s, I thought I started in recovery. My late 20s, I quit purging altogether, except for I didn't know working out all the time was a form of purge. So I would do that. I would do like an hour and a half of Bikram yoga. And sometimes I would do that twice a day, which was torture. And, so I could name all of my behaviors, but we would be here all day long. But the main takeaway is I'm all about connection now. And it's really cool because I get to actually connect with people like my family and my friends, because I would be present with them, but I wasn't really present. For example, if my family was hosting a dinner or my parents were cooking or something, I would show up with my own food. And then I would be sitting there at the table while they're all talking, having a good time, thinking about how I wish I was eating the food they made. So again, I was present, but not really present.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love how you outline how it isolated you, because gosh, whenever we talk about medicating behaviors, and if this is the first time you've ever heard the term medicating behaviors, we're talking about any type of behavior that enhances the way you're feeling because you want to celebrate, numbs you out, because you can use the same thing to numb yourself out or try and, get that dopamine rush,
Right.
or cope with a loss or whatever. At whatever point, when we have that point where we're like, I'm uncomfortable with the way I feel, or I would like to change the way I feel, and I need something outside of myself to do that. And so much of the time, we have no awareness that is happening or developing. And so especially when it comes to the point of people like you and I that end up struggling with something that evolves, it's normal. We all have certain things that are soothing to us in moments of distress. So like part of the human, we talk about the human experience. We have periods of emotional dysregulation. That's absolutely normal for all of us. But what do we do when we feel dysregulated? And so as you and I have had conversations and talk about, much of that has surrounded food. And for myself, included food or restricting that relationship with food. I'd like to go there and talk about how, we say eating disorders, it's what everybody recognizes, but in the United States of America, I think that it much more is appropriate if you turn it around and we just talk about it as disordered eating, because whether we are eating too much, eating too little, over exercising, using the orthorexia like you were talking about. That relationship to self and relationship to food is the disorder. There is what we're talking about, and people fall in and out of it. Now, and this is one of the things that I love about your story and why you're so open, because you don't have to be, you don't have to lose everything, and your life does not have to fall apart completely in order for you to seek help and get, get what you need. And I think some people think that that's the case. A lot of people that we see that end up getting treatment or seeing a therapist or changing their behavior or whatever, you know, think that having an eating disorder has to look this way, this level of extreme. And, you have just outlined so many variables through your life. And I mean, just painted this such a broad picture. So, you know, what an awesome mom you had, though, to step in and try and get you help at a young age. Because I think, especially at that time, still in the 90s, it was a very sweep everything under the rug and act like it's normal societally, you
Well,
know?
yeah, I mean, that was also common in my family, but for whatever reason, she did act on this. And I think it's because I called her directly and I was like, I'm scared something's wrong. But
Hmm.
my parents were both amazing, but communication was not a strong suit for either one of them, especially my dad. And so, yeah, I'm very, very, very thankful that she heard me. I felt seen, and then we tried to figure it out. But then once it didn't really get figured out, we didn't like keep trying to figure it out. And again, because I was still high functioning
Hmm.
and I didn't look like, if someone is anorexic, for example, there's a point to which it's obvious to the world that or to parents like under the roof where they might look at their child and think, oh gosh, like something might be going on. I looked very normal, but inside I was completely falling apart and a complete wreck.
Hmm.
And I would say that continued again until my late 30s. High functioning, successful job, able to get things done, but inside my head, completely a wreck and a disaster. I lost. So back to the speaking of my mom and the binge purge, again, the purging stopped the actual throwing up, but not
Hmm.
working out. And I can't remember, that was years. Now that I'm looking at the numbers in my head and thinking of when my mom died. So my mom died in 2014. And I would say around 2006, I made a vow. I'm like, I am no longer throwing up ever again. And again, they were getting further and further apart,
Hmm.
but I just knew I was damaging my body and I was able to stop that action. I couldn't stop the binges, but I was able to. And by the way, nobody was talking about binge eating either at the time. So I was like, I don't know. Am I the only person that just eats this way?
Hmm.
And so I felt very alone in that. So anywho, I I remember around that time like feeling like I was, you know, starting this date and then however many years later I was 12, 14 years. Again, I don't have the years exact, except for the year my
Hmm.
mom died. I know that 2014. I felt like I had this over a decade chip situation of
Yeah.
not throwing up. That was my sobriety from that. And the my mom died on October 28th. And well, actually, sorry, she died on the 27th. And then on the 28th, it was my sister's birthday. And we decided to get a food truck and celebrate. It was all very bizarre because it was like we were
Mm.
mourning, but like, we should also celebrate my sister. That's what my mom would want. And I hadn't really eaten that much because my mom had cancer and she was in hospice at my sister's home. So she died with us. Like I was holding her
Mm.
hand. And you're just not very hungry during that. And at my sister's birthday party the next day, I remember eating and I hadn't even eaten that much, but something in me was like, I don't like that I just ate this. And I went and I threw up for the first time. And
Mm.
so, and then that started another like 6 years of it. And that's when I finally had enough and started to figure out I've got to get, I became a mom during that time. And I would look at my daughter and I would think, I'm not able to connect with her because my mind is so still consumed with all of this stuff. But I share that as an example to say that sometimes you can think you're on this path and I, you can have a traumatic event and then boom, your brain goes back to a behavior that will soothe you and numb you and
Yes.
is comfortable for you. And it almost seemed out of my control. I just went and I did it. And then afterwards, and I was like, well, okay, I guess this is what we do now. And I'm thankful to say, though, that because I got all the different parts of recovery, like I think I had only eliminated the throwing up part, right? But since I
Hmm.
sought true healing in all the different disordered behaviors,
Yes.
and I stopped restricting and, trying to control everything and really found true freedom. My dad passed away in 2021. And I was sort of nervous, like, oh gosh, like I'm in recovery, but how am I going to handle this? And I
Hmm.
was just in so much therapy for other things and was really putting in the work and
Hmm.
dedicated to taking care of myself that, of course, I mourned my dad terribly, but I'm just so thankful to say I didn't numb out. I stayed in it and I dug in and I I did the work. So there is hope for that too. I don't want you to think just because you experience the loss of someone or a traumatic event that instantly means that your behavior will return. But I celebrate that and I acknowledge that. And I think it's important that we all do that. When you have a moment,
Absolutely.
acknowledge it and pat yourself on the back, celebrate yourself because it is not, it's not easy to do, but I truly think that I rewired my brain. And so and there's hope for that. Our
Hmm.
brains are so moldable. And I credit that to therapists, I've done neurofeedback on my brain. And then just the simple process of no longer restricting and eating adequately and fueling my body and allowing foods like I used to never allow Oreos. And now I have Oreos in my home and I can trust myself. And that didn't happen overnight, but it's sort of that as if mentality. If you act as if it's normal, then it will become normal and it won't be this crazy thing that you have Oreos in your pantry and you're going to eat them all or you have to throw them away or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you go out to eat, order the pizza, act as if I'm going to act as if I can order this and I'm going to be just fine. Just like my friend in high school that could eat the ice cream slowly and share it. Now I eat ice cream as if, now I don't even have to as if anymore because my brain's already caught up with me. But during
Hmm.
that, I mean, it was just a repetitive thing of, okay, I'm acting as if this is normal. I'm acting as if me ordering this, getting this at the grocery store. And I would almost do this thing with my brain if I would be at the grocery store and I would be like, oh, I wonder if I should get that. And I'd be like, no, I probably shouldn't get that. That's not. And I'd be like, well, I guess I'm getting it today. Like I would literally do the opposite of what my brain was telling me. And
Yeah.
now I don't have such a desire for some of that food that isn't nourishing my body the way that I want. And I still have it. I still have not someone that's saying, oh, I don't eat any of that stuff like Oreos because I do. And it's great, but I eat it and I move on and I don't think about it over and over. But it took a lot of work to get there. And I celebrate that. Like I'm very, very, very proud of myself.
As you should be. And oh my gosh, I love so many of the things that you said, and
Sorry, I
I'm trying to
ramble a
say,
lot.
no, that was not a ramble at all. That was very clear and concise, and but it was. Yeah, I always said I have these like bullet points, and I'm like, I want to go back to that. It was so good. You identified two things, right? We have the central nervous system and the brain, our mainframe that we obviously know controls our body, right? And we would assume all trauma lives there. And then you're talking about coping mechanisms and how you're reframing your brain to control that and the emotions that are in. Okay. So you've got all these traumatic experiences that have, whether it's little t trauma, big T trauma, we've framed how Amy is looking at food and looking at her body and her relationship to herself and the whole world. And it's disconnected and dysregulated, and it's not loving, and it's not whole, and it's not all these things. There's a wonderful book, if you haven't read it, or people who are listening haven't read it. It's by Bessel van der Kolk. His name is so hard to say for me. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it talks about how trauma is stored up in the body. And so, you have I love that part of your story where you're able to talk about the disorder and the medicating winning out for you in this life changing experience. I mean, like, for most of us, if life goes how it quote unquote should go, when as children, our parents die before us. And, it's quite a traumatic experience, no matter how they die, what happens. And it's so the grieving all of it. And then you had I won't call it a redo. It's not a redo, but it's like it, it, and you're getting to celebrate it in such a different way because you did the work. You reprocessed the brain, and it is possible, but it takes so much work. And I love you named so many things that I think any professional would say. All of these tools are some of the best to work on the underlying causes and conditions that disconnect us from our relationship to ourselves and cause us to, hey, I'm out of my skin. I don't like the way my body feels. I want to fill this void. I want to control. I want to, all those things. I want to throw in there. Sorry, I'm really thirsty. One second. I can relate so much to that space of doing the work and then being scared. And I want to bring this up to say that no matter what you're struggling from, if you are curious about jumping in the boat of recovery from something, if you're already in recovery from something, I think that there's this wish list that I know, especially for those of us who are in like chemical addiction recovery. We think about life, completely without a substance, and that, like, all right, if I'm going to give this up, once I finally do, like, this is a big sacrifice, and I mean, life's going to be good, right? Like, it's like, if I'm going to make this huge sacrifice and do all this work, all of these things will come true. I won't have any worries because this is the source of all my problems. Well, the truth is, right, life's going to hit us, and the tools are what help us to navigate those struggles and problems and things so much better than we did before, and hopefully are able to survive through it. Before I got sober, actually, since a little kid, my worst fear was that I was going to get a brain tumor and die. And I remember when I got sober in 2011, and I finally grasped the tenets of recovery and said, okay, I can imagine my life without substances controlling it to numb out and all the things. And I want this way of life. Like, I'm feeling joy and I can do this for the rest of my life, but I cannot imagine if I get news that I have some type of terminal illness or my worst fear, a brain tumor, that I cannot imagine staying sober through that. So fast forward, 2016 comes along. I've been suffering for a really long time with unknown symptoms. They couldn't figure it out. And finally, after like a year and a half of all kinds of tests, they found that I had a pretty sizable brain tumor. And anyway, it was the same type of thing in that I was leading up to knowing something was severely wrong with me. And I was already in the midst of major trauma, but I was so scared that my old ways, my old coping was going to come in and take over. And because I had done the work and I was connected to people that were supporting me and knew how to support me, and I was honest and using and embracing all of the principles that I was taught, and I'd done the trauma work, I was able to make it through that without picking up a drink or a drug or resorting to former eating habits that were harmful. I spent 6 months basically in a hospital bed. So I'm thinking the whole time, like, I'm going to get fat because I can't just lay here and eat the hospital food they're bringing me. So like I had that on top of, so I say all that to say, I, I just want to highlight, you can have the hardest point in your life. And Amy and I are here to tell you, it does not have to take you back into old behavior, old things that no longer serve us, that are trying to take us down. So I know the story is about you, but I just felt like that was such a great mirror of overcoming traumatic circumstances when life hits us on life's terms.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that you're okay. And right now I'm still trying to process the fact that it was one of your biggest fears and it actually happened. Like
It's crazy.
what I
I
can't help
don't
but
know.
wonder if like subconsciously, like that was your body telling you like, hey, there's something's not right up here, or that fear. So that is, gosh, that's really, really crazy, but
It
everything's
is.
good. You're in remission.
Yep, I get annual scans and everything's been fine ever since. And I people ask me all the time. They're like, what do you think it means? All the things. And I walk away saying nothing but gifts. I got nothing but gifts from this, and perspective is everything, right? Like even for you and your story, no matter what we're talking about, overcoming, perspective is everything. So we can either choose to be the victim and this all happened to me, or this was part of my story, and this is what I'm using to propel me forward. This is what I learned, the lessons that I learned, and this is what's serving me to live life to the fullest today. And so for me, I walked away with, like, I get to, just like you said, I mean, that gift of experiencing the death of your father, using your tools, how empowering that was for you. For me, a lot of those same things. And there's so much more to my story, which I won't go into now. But like I know beyond the shadow of a doubt, like every day, when I choose to remember this and wake up, I get to use all of my experiences and the things that happened, that the 30 times I should have died that I didn't, are meant for me to be in the seat right here having conversation with you, so that we can hopefully help save someone's life. I mean, you were referencing, it's easy to spot. Oh my gosh. I'm going to go straight into this because we've all done it. We've seen somebody and said, that's what an eating disorder looks like. There's somebody at my gym, a female, and my husband and I, every time we see her, it's just one of those, we look at each other and just our shoulders shrug. And I mean, she is a skeleton of a human being. And she's one of those, the most extreme cases we can think of, that I say a prayer for this woman every time I either see her or think about her, because she looks like a skeleton with skin on it. And she's like as tall as me. I'm 6'3", and it'll be the heat of summer and she'll walk in there with, those padded, like the coats that people wear in the north that are quilted. And so they're like super warm and they're like down to your knees. It'll be July and she'll walk in her tights and flip flops with one of those on because she's so cold. And then she gets on the elliptical and stands on there for 2 hours. And it looks like she's about to fall over. I bring that up to say there are so many ends of the spectrum that eating disorders can look like. And she is one I would compare to, if we're taking that and then you compare addiction, people talk about like, well, if you're not the guy with the brown bag homeless under the bridge, then are you really an alcoholic? Oh, let me tell you, there's
Yes.
plenty of different types of addicts out there. And so another reason I'm so grateful that you are so open about your story, because we've talked about, there's all these different levels. I say levels, they are not levels. There are different types of disordered eating that have been identified by the DSM. which I always screw up that acronym, and so I'm not going to even try and say it. But and I think that where the biggest thing that we can do is share experience and say eating disorder looks can look like a completely normal person. It can look like a the beautiful person sitting in front of me right now. It can look like the person I just described that goes to my gym. It can look like me. It can look like the guy that has a six pack and is probably 250 pounds of muscle, but like, looks like all different kinds of things. And so with that, I want to like lead into asking you, how did just in a nutshell, how did your coping skills, using air quotes if you're listening to this, your unhealthy coping skills, how did they serve you? And what type of social reinforcement did you receive that you was used as fuel to propel you going in a negative direction?
Well, that's one of the number one reasons why on Outweigh we talk a lot about how you should never comment on people's bodies. Even if you're trying to give a compliment, you never know what that person's going through. You never know if they have an eating disorder or they have cancer and they don't want
Mm-hmm.
people to know about it, or they have depression and they don't want to draw attention to themselves in any way, shape, or form. But yet the minute you do, you might either make them feel shame of like, oh, someone noticed, shoot, they're going to know I'm sick. Or they're going to be like, yes, someone noticed.
Mm-hmm.
My eating disorder is paying off. All my disordered behaviors are working. So then you reinforce
Yep.
more behaviors, which that definitely happened to me. If people would notice certain things about my body, especially after my mom died, this is a weird thing I had to work through in therapy a lot because I was so just perplexed by it. But I was associating, not eating with grieving. And because my throwing up had come back, I was not eating that much, but then also purging. So I was losing weight because you don't always lose weight in a binge purge
Mm-hmm.
situation. In fact, in my earlier years, I gained more weight and I was very inflamed. And also, professionals know what to look out for too. So it's funny that I would sort of be in denial about it and not really talk to people about it. But I'm sure any therapist I was seeing at the time, if I wasn't being honest, our mutual friend, Kat DeFata, who's a licensed therapist that specializes in eating
Mm-hmm.
disorders, like she talks about how she can notice sometimes when clients aren't telling everything
Yeah.
because she can see it in their face. She can see you get swollen here. I'd be very inflamed. So while I was thinner, I still had a lot of the inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
All that to say, I've gained weight and then I've lost weight. This was a season of me losing weight, but I was still inflamed. However, my body was smaller and people at work didn't know. And I remember this one particular boss came in town. He was like, "Oh my gosh, you look so good. You look so thin." And I thought, oh, okay, I look good. And this is working because also I'm grieving and I'm, it just, for whatever it was,
Yeah.
that was the weird
Yeah.
part that I said I had to unpack in therapy of like that. To me, true grieving looked like weight loss. And if I was smaller, then people know that I'm grieving. And then also I just liked I liked being smaller. But I also like to recognize here too, because you were saying eating disorders don't discriminate. They
Mm-hmm.
are all shapes and sizes, all ethnicities, all sexes, all the different things.
Mm-hmm.
But I do recognize that I'm a white woman with thin privilege. So sometimes even talking in this space, I feel a little like, oh, but I can only speak to my experience. But I know that
Right.
there's, when it comes to body image stuff and the body positive movement, like I know I don't fall into that category because there are other people out there representing that and they represent it well and they have a true space to be there. And they are literally saying, I am in a bigger body and society needs to learn to accept that I am healthy. There is nothing wrong with me. And, you know, just the images that we've been plastered with for years and years and years is, thin equals good. So we're trying to undo that, but I do recognize that I am a white woman with thin privilege. So I fall into a category that is already acceptable by society.
Right.
So it's very, very hard for others that are not. And I recognize the uphill fight that is happening for that. And I want to come alongside and champion those people
Yes.
and encourage them and say, oh, keep it up. Because yes, we're making progress, but we're such a fat phobic society. So,
Yes.
Don't comment on people's bodies, even if you mean well. Don't comment on what people are eating. Don't comment on anything. It's just not, if you want to compliment someone in a way that, gives them praise, you could say something like, oh my gosh, talk about their personality, or you're looking so radiant today, or you're glowing, or something like that can affirm them, but it won't likely lead to more and more unhealthy behaviors. It won't add fuel to the fire, as they say. And, you were talking about Body Keeps the Score, which I did read that book, and it's a phenomenal book, very scientific, very hard to get through, but I recommend they have the Audible version too. So you can actually get the hard copy and the Audible and sort of go back and forth and consume it both ways, because then it's more, to me, was more digestible.
Same.
And we've had doctors and experts on Outweigh before too, talking about how, the anxiety that you feel around food and the chemicals that are released into your body, if you're freaking out about eating the Oreo or whatever it is, that release that's happening in your body is worse for you than just probably the chemicals or the bad parts you're worried about in the Oreo, because you've labeled Oreos as bad. And really, food doesn't have a moral value. So if you just see all foods as, they're not good or bad, they're just food, they're just fuel for your body, then it takes the pressure off of that. And then maybe you won't have as much anxiety around food, because there is something, our bodies have all kinds of reactions to everything. And The Body Keeps the Score is just such a fascinating book, and how there's been certain situations now that I'm more in tune with my body and I'm able to connect with myself more, and I'm not numbing out more, how much more aware I am of what my body is doing and my energy and how it feels. And when I am maybe triggered by something, which when I am triggered, that is my own responsibility. I'm not someone that I'm triggered by something like I immediately be like, I can't believe you said that, or I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe I saw that online, or I can't believe this TV show did that, or I can't believe Taylor Swift did that in her music video. It's like,
yeah,
get over it. If it's your trigger, then you have a responsibility to recognize it.
That's right.
And then you have a responsibility to, and I have the responsibility to work through it. And then it's up to me to ultimately kind of do what I do to navigate that and come out on the other side. I can't, again, it's victim mode of like, and we want to get out of that victim mentality. One of my favorite authors who actually lives in Nashville, his name's Donald Miller. He wrote a book called Hero on a Mission, and he kind of unpacks how there's 4 characters in everybody's story. There's the victim, the hero, the guide, and the villain. And in our lifetime, we can play all of those different characters. We'll rotate in and out. But like, who do you want to show up as ultimately? And I would say mostly we should strive to be the guide and then the hero if that's in store for you. And in whatever case, like it doesn't mean you're just this heroic person that saved someone's life, but hero means like you show up and guide, you lead someone, you come out on the other side. You're a hero in your own story of your recovery from eating disorder, drugs, alcohol, and, cancer survival. You get to be a guide to others that are going through similar things. And he was on my 4 Things podcast last year and said, when you're going through something in life and facing adversity, or there's challenges or this or that happens, which I've always tried to have a positive perspective of like, oh, well, I don't want this to be wasted. I want it to have purpose. So yes, I'm acknowledging that this is crappy and sucky, but how can I use it for good? Or how is it going to be used for good in my life or others or whatever? And he had such a simple way of asking a question that sums all of that up. And it's, what does this make possible? That's the question you ask yourself. You're not ignoring that this is awful or horrible or whatever. But I have so many what does this make possible stories from
Yeah.
really, really heavy moments in my life that could have been crippling to me. You know, honestly, just could have just gotten stuck there for a very long time. And who knows, numbed out with, Xanax and wine and all. I could have gone
Hmm.
down a path. Thankfully, I
Yeah.
don't think I have, you know, I, I'm shocked I didn't get hooked on certain things other than
Sure.
just my eating disorder, because I know that I've had behaviors that are extremely unhealthy, but I was able to recognize them and stop them. Some brains or chemical makeups aren't able to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful that I did not have that happen, but I know I'm not above it by any means. Again, they don't discriminate, but thankfully I've had that perspective, and my mom had that perspective during her cancer journey. We have a whole movement around that called Pimp and Joy, which is all about representing joy and spreading joy. And, so when Donald said that on my podcast last year, it's like, oh, now I have an easier way to take myself
Hmm.
through this process. And I've asked myself that question so much lately. And it's just, okay, in any situation, like technical difficulties on my computer or a big,
Yes.
life event that's devastating. It's like, okay, two things can be true in this moment. Like I can be very distraught and sad and hurting and
Hmm.
painful, but I can also want to seek joy and find happiness and peace and seek a purpose for this. So, what does this make possible? And so I love that we're all going to go through different things in life, but I love that question so much. And it, to me, has just helped my body sort of release in understanding again some of the stuff we've gone through, some of that energy that is in our bodies, our body keeping the score. Like when my body
Hmm.
starts to feel a certain way, I'm like, okay, what's happening? Why am I triggered? What is making me feel this way? I'm going to breathe through this and like, oh, it was because of this. Oh, and because I went through that, this was made possible. So body, release this. And then you get
Hmm.
closer and closer to hopefully not ever, having those moments where your body, freaks out because of something. But it's a real deal. Like our brains may sometimes forget, but our body remembers.
100%. And so, so many of the things that you've talked about, really, I keep going back and I say this all the time, but it's so true. And I'm such a metaphorical person. You're talking about living such a black and white thinking lifestyle. The healing looks like moving more into the gray. When you talk about coping skills that you used to use and removing those, you're moving more into the gray of think it's not bad or good. It's not this or that.
It's not linear.
Yes.
When Lisa and I started Outweigh, in fact, our tagline is Outweigh, a life without disordered eating outweighs everything. And we're covering the gray area of
Yes.
this space. And our first image for it that we had on the podcast, which we changed it to something colorful, but our original one was black and white because it was more gray. Because like
Hmm.
you're saying, we wanted it to look gray, not black and white. And I feel like the minute you can release anything in your life that is so black and white and you're so rigid about, you might want to
Hmm.
do the work to figure out why you're holding on to that type of
Yes.
thinking and that type of behavior and enter into the gray space because it's it's freer over here in the gray.
It is. But it also, I mean, I don't know about you, but like that black and white thinking though loves to creep back up on me. And so if I'm not
Oh yeah.
prepared, back to what you were talking about, it's like all those tools help keep me prepared for situations for when it creeps back up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the gray is awesome and I love living in the gray. And I know you love living in the gray, but let's be honest, the black and white, like I mean, it'll just smack you around in the face or walking around the corner and all of a sudden it's there. So you've just spent a few moments talking about some things that you use to identify when you're emotionally dysregulated, what you use to self-soothe. I just wonder, is there anything, do you have like a top, like, what is your go-to when you are triggered? What if you had to give three things that you stop yourself and do, and you had to think of those three things right now, would you be able to identify and talk about those?
Yeah, it'd be gratitude, journaling, and meditation.
Mm,
So, I mean, I could probably name more, but those are the first three that come to my mind. Gratitude is one way where you can instantly, I mean, it's neuroscience. Like there's so much behind it. Like you can research all the different ways in which stopping to acknowledge the different things you have to be thankful for can instantly alter your mood.
hmm
And whether you want to just do that verbally or look around or see it, but then if you take pen to paper, it's even more effective. We have a whole four things line that supports Haiti. My kids are from Haiti. I adopted them five years ago.
Lovely.
Yeah, we adopted them from Port-au-Prince, and and that was, again, another part of my recovery, like bringing children into my home. And I had so many rules for them. I was so black and white when it came to their food.
Mm,
And now they get to live in the gray with food. And my 15-year-old daughter is like, oh, this is so much better than when we first moved here. You were so strict. And now they get to, now they get to have things, because she was 10 when they first got here. And she was like, what the heck? This crazy lady won't let us, you know, I remember they were at Sunday school and the Sunday school teacher gave them candy and I flipped out. And, but that was my own stuff. I was
yeah.
projecting my own stuff onto that situation. So anyway, becoming a mom definitely flipped that. But Haiti is near and dear to my heart. So we have a whole four things gratitude journal that actually is for beginners of gratitude, because when I first started journaling, I was very intimidated. In fact, I didn't really do it because I was so intimidated.
hmm
And
hmm
we have the four things line is under espoir, which espoir means hope in Haitian Creole. And Mary and I founded that together. And when we created the journal, we thought, oh, we just need to keep this simple. Like it's four things. You can make it one word or you can write a whole paragraph in each section for each thing. We put stickers in the back for the days you don't have words, like grab a sticker and put it on there. And then that'll ultimately get you more comfortable with it, but you're still
Yeah.
leaning into what you have to be thankful for. And that's when I started to realize all the research that's out there with gratitude and how amazing it is for you. I mean, and look at some of the most famous thought leaders in the world. You know, you'll likely find that they have a gratitude practice,
hmm
and they lean into it. And so anyway, the science is there. So I'd say gratitude, and then the writing down part, the journaling, because I started journaling in the four things gratitude journal. And then another friend here in Nashville who is an author. Her name's Allie Fallon, and she has a book called Write Your Story. And she has a workshop called Write Your Story, but she has a book called The Power of Writing It Down. And there truly is power in writing things down. And
hmm
my therapist also, because I'm in a creative space too, sometimes I felt really blocked and like I just couldn't come up with content or think, or like I just didn't feel like myself, or this used to be easier for me, or I don't know what's going on. She recommended a book to me that said the number one thing you need to do is write like 3 pages every morning, or set a timer for 3 minutes and write every single morning. And that will start to unlock your brain. And it's crazy. The more I wrote, the more I felt like things started to process easier in my head, the more I
hmm
started to be able to, and you kind of just, even if you don't have anything to write, you can just say, I don't have anything to write right now. And
Free flow. Yep.
write that over and over until your brain then starts giving you something to write. And don't edit, don't hold back, just
hmm
write. And so, yeah, the gratitude into, the power of writing it down, the journaling, to the meditation, which the meditation is a newer piece to me because I'm still not the best at it, but trying is cool. And I'm really trying. And I'm currently this week in a forgiveness meditation, and I'm doing it 7 days in a row, the same exact 10-minute forgiveness meditation. And it's not just about forgiving others. It's more so I'm using it to forgive myself
Mm.
for so much, for various things, but ways of thinking and things that I've done to myself, and just sort of releasing, again, body keeps the score, releasing your body of that, the stuff you get stuck in the past, the things you're holding on to that you no longer need to hold on to. And hopefully that will help prevent my hope is that it will help prevent any potential disease I may have, down the line. I don't even like saying that I might have it potentially. I don't like putting that out
Yeah.
to the universe. But also, even when I find myself saying something like, oh, if I mess up, oh, you're so stupid. Like, I'm now in a mindset of, okay, I forgive you to myself. I forgive myself for just calling myself stupid. You're smart. You're capable. You are not, I think it's just, you have to instantly
Yes.
flip it, because that's another part of my brain I'm trying to rewire. And I carry that over from my childhood, that I am not capable. I am not smart. Like, that's stuff that was in my head probably in high school and carried on well into
Wait,
my
do you mean
adulthood.
you struggle with imposter syndrome?
Oh, well, yeah, I have that. But, I also have to recognize too, when you also can step back and kind of sometimes acknowledge different accomplishments you made. And this falls into that
Mhm.
gratitude section too, of like, step back and look at what you've done. Look at your life and the trajectory it's been on, the things you've been able to, you've been through, you've persevered, your strength, your tenacity. Look at different times where you have been strong. Don't focus on those times where you're like, oh, I wish I would have done that better, or I was so weak then. It's like, okay, look what you've overcome. Look what you've done. Look what you've accomplished in your career. Look what you've accomplished in relationships. If you're a mom or a dad, look what you've accomplished there. And then it's a domino effect. You'll start to want to accomplish more and know that you are capable. And therefore, if speaking of Donald Miller on that same podcast, he was talking about imposter syndrome. And he said, there's a certain point where I look at some successful people and I look around and I'm like, okay, you're still playing this imposter syndrome card, but look at you. Like, how do you not see it? Like,
Mhm.
at some point it's time to, for me, I kind of had to put my big girl pants on or my big person pants on, whatever. Because I
Mhm.
think men might need to do that at times too. But just for
Yeah.
women, unfortunately, women in the workplace, women in media, women in radio, like, there's more, the men are the hosts, the men are everything.
Mm.
More and more women are starting to get their own shows and different things. But I love my job as a co-host. I'm not saying that's the dynamic on my show, but when you look at it, you just think, as a woman, if I were to think about hosting my own show, I might look around and be like, well, is that really possible? Because
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
mean, it's probably not really going to happen for me. So I'll just settle for co-host, which a quote that my friend told me the other day that I love is, if you settle for, if you, I want to say this right. I was like, oh, I don't want to mess it up. If you settle for crumbs, you'll always be starving. And
Mm.
I love that. And you can apply that to your
Yeah.
love life, to your partner, to your friendships, to your career goals. If you settle for crumbs, you'll always be starving. And so just sit with that one for a little bit and think, where in your life are you settling, and where can you show up and do more and be more and prove to yourself that it's possible, that you can do it. And yeah, imposter syndrome is such a crazy thing. And I know so many people deal with it, but I'm someone that's really trying to come out on the other side
Same.
and own what I've been able to do, what you've been able to do. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with being like, yes, I'm here. And actually, I deserve good things and I'm worthy and I deserve to be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So true. Oh my gosh. We've talked about so much goodness, and I love how many nuggets of I call them little truth nuggets. I as you as well have the privilege of interviewing so many fascinating people. You go about these interviews and talking and conversations and everything, and I love how many truth nuggets you've dropped, these little bombs in our episode. I can't wait to go back through and listen to this again, because there's so many powerful things that you've said, especially that one, the crumbs. My gosh. So I know we're running out of time. I want to ask one thing real quick about, for any of the Bobby Bones fans. What's your favorite thing about what you're doing in that space, and maybe what's coming up in that, or on your podcast, if you'd like to highlight anything surrounding that.
my favorite thing is the show has always, ever since I joined it 17 years ago, we've always shared very personal stories, which we let people into certain things. It doesn't mean they're getting every aspect of our life, but we've always wanted to share and come alongside. And whether we're giving someone driving to work in their car. I mean, because this is when we first started, there was no podcasting. There was no
Right.
that. I mean, people
Right.
were listening in their car on the radio. And, they really would be driving to work in the mornings, and maybe they needed that laugh or they needed that cry. We sort of shared it all. And so that, to me, that's been the coolest part, is continuing to do that and having that connection, even if it's just one person listening,
Mm-hmm.
if they're impacted in whatever way, which could be literally as simple as they laughed at something silly that
Mm-hmm.
one of us did, or they felt seen, because we share a story that's like, oh yeah, or oh yeah, I felt stupid in high school too, and I've been carrying that with me, and I need to release it. Or, my mom has cancer right now as well. My mom shared her whole journey on the Bobby Bone Show. That's where the Pimp and Joy movement really, really grew, and now has, what does this make possible? Like, that movement alone has donated over $2 million to various causes. And
Wow.
that's all because my mom's simple act one day at MD Anderson Hospital to go to the chapel after another diagnosis of it coming back. And she said, Lord, use this cancer for good. And it wasn't, Lord, heal me. It just said, use this cancer for good. And the joy
I just
part
got
was
chills.
Nehemiah 8:10, the joy of the Lord is my strength. Like, she was very rooted in her faith and knew who she was in that. And that's where her joy came from. And so to be able to share her story like that with listeners, and to see how Pimp and Joy has impacted them, and them in their Pimp and Joy shirts and gear and all of this stuff too. I mentioned the Four Things Journal and the SPWA stuff and Pimp and Joy. It's all through a company called The Shop Forward, which that's their website, theshopforward.com. And so they have all of their stuff has an impact. But Pimp and Joy, 100% of the proceeds have always gone to spreading joy, which my mom passed away before we ever launched the first item. So she has no idea that we've
Wow.
donated all of this money. She has no idea what was made possible by her prayer. But every time I see a Pimp and Joy hat or shirt or whatever, I'm like, oh, ding, that's an answer to my mom's prayer. Because so that's been the coolest part of my job. And then coming up in trying to do things on my own a little bit. That's my number one, baby. I love my show, my role on the Bobby Bone Show. But in spreading my wings a little bit with my Four Things podcast, I've started to do live events. And I have one actually coming up here in Nashville, March 25th at Franklin Theater. And I'm so excited. I love being face to face. When you're talking to people on the radio or podcasting, it's like, hello, is anyone there? Like, you hope someone's there, but then to be at a live event and seeing people's faces, you're like, oh, there you are. And something that I learned about myself is I really love being in front of people in that way. That fills my cup up. So I hope to do more. We did one in Kansas last year. We'll do 2 shows in Nashville on March 25th. The 7 p.m. sold out, so we added a 3 p.m. So that was cool. And then we'll try to hit up other cities throughout the year. So that's what's coming up for me that I am over the moon about.
Oh my gosh, how exciting. And I wish you the best of luck with that. I just hope it just goes every way that it's supposed to, and thrives and oh my gosh, that, obviously there's what I would refer to as a divine hand on from your mom's line down to you. I started to tear up as you were telling the story about your mom. My goodness, how moving. I can't wait to go check out the Pimp and Joy stuff myself after this. And oh gosh, thank you for sharing that so much. And I wish you all the best. Not that you even need any luck. Like, my gosh, you've got this momentum and it's just so great. And I'm so glad that we're getting to share it on this platform. Thank you again so much for your time, your openness, your vulnerability, and your willingness to do exactly what your mom did. Say, like, I'm not going to be a victim. Let what I've been through be a service, a catalyst for change, how it can be of maximum service. And I truly feel like that's what you're doing. So cool. Last question for you, for that person that is listening, that's identified with even the smallest part of your story today. What piece of encouragement would you like to leave with them?
Chase rainbows. I feel like that's an easy way to just summarize that there's going to be different dark times in life, and to know that the rainbow is coming and that the rainbow represents that hope. The last 2 years of my life, I would say 2020, 2021, and then, so 3 years, 2022, were probably some of the darkest, most challenging years of my life for various reasons. That some stuff is public, some stuff is very private. And so I felt like very just in this storm. And I was like, okay, when am I going to come out? When am I going to come out? And I finally feel as though I'm coming to the other side. And I sort of feel like this is my rainbow year. It doesn't mean that, challenging things may happen to me this year. I feel more prepared for them than ever. But I don't want to stay under that. I feel like I did stay in my dark cloud a little bit too long, but I was working through it. And now it's my rainbow year. So I'm celebrating that. But I think even in my dark times that will come up again in life, because life is ebb and flow. We all have people we love and care about. We all have different circumstances that happen. And I want to chase the rainbows. So I guess that would be my last bit of encouragement. And one way to do that is sort of with that question, what does this make possible? So, and I love Casey Musgrave's Rainbow song. I've been listening to that on repeat. I know it's been out a while, but she's saying like, your umbrella, like move it. Like there's a rainbow over your head. You just have to move the umbrella. And so sometimes we can hold tight to your umbrella. Baby, I'm just trying to tell you.
Yeah.
There's always been a rainbow hanging over. I can't sing, but hanging over your head. And sometimes we can't see the rainbow because we're just clinging so tight.
Oh, so beautiful and so true. And your voice is beautiful. You can't sing.
No. If people have listened to the Bobby Bone Show, they know that because we do karaoke all the time. And I have butchered it. So.
Oh gosh. Well, I will say, just to kind of cap this off, I love that you speak in so many, oh my gosh, I just lost the word. Dang it. My vocabulary, at the end of a conversation, sometimes you just completely lose it. Metaphor. Metaphors are one of the greatest teachers, I think, for us as humankind. But for me, absolutely, I need a good metaphor to drill a lesson in for me. And you just dropped so many through this interview, and I love that you speak through metaphors so much. The rainbow is beautiful. I love that. Seek the rainbow. And I will end how I always do, reminding all of our viewers and listeners that it is never too late to start loving yourself, and you're only ever one decision away from a completely different life.
For more information on today's episode, check out the show notes. Recovery Stories is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please share with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are grateful for you and hope that you have been encouraged by today's episode. As always, remember you are only one decision away from a completely different life, and it is never too late to start loving yourself.